Our last lesson for this week is lesson 93, and it's the discriminant. Last year's Algebra 2 class liked when they had these problems because they're actually not too hard. Okay, so the discriminant. We first need to write down the quadratic formula, which I know you all know. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? I can't help but doing it with that song. Anyway, so the discriminant. The discriminant is part of this quadratic equation, and it's the part that is underneath the square root sign. So the discriminant is simply b squared minus 4ac. Now, how can we use this discriminant? We can use it to determine what type of solution our equation will have. So there's three types of solutions our equation might have. The first one, if b squared minus 4ac equals 0, then the solution will be just one real number if this discriminant equals 0. So let's look and see what exactly that means. All right, so if we have the equation x squared plus 4x plus 4, we look at that. Let's use this discriminant to see that it has only one real number. So b squared would be 4 squared, and then we have to subtract 4ac, which would be 4 times a is just 1 in this situation, and c is 4. So 4 squared minus 4 times 4, which is 6, so that would be 16 minus 16. 16 minus 16 equals 0. So in this equation, there's only one number that will make this equation work. And what that number would be? So that one, you can figure it out by simply factoring it with the two parentheses. So here, it would be two numbers multiplied together that equal 4 and added together equal 4. So it's x plus 2 times x plus 2 equals 0. So you can see that x can only be equal to negative 2. So without even doing that solving, we didn't even have to solve it. We could just look at b squared minus 4ac, which is the discriminant, and see if that equals 0, and then we would have known that it would have one real solution, just one real number, not two. Okay? So you don't even have to figure out the factoring, you just have to see what b squared, which was 4 squared minus 4ac, and that equals 0. Let's look at a different scenario. If the discriminant, which remember is b squared minus 4ac, if that equals a positive number, then the solution is two real numbers. Okay, so let's look at one where that's the situation. If we have x squared plus 5x minus 1 equals 0, we're going to look at the discriminant. B squared, which would be 5 squared, which would be 25, minus 4 times 1 times c, which is negative 1. So that's 25 minus a negative 4, which is 25 plus 4, which is 29. Now 29 is not the solution. It's not the solution, but it is a positive number. So it tells us that x squared plus 5x minus 1 has two real number solutions. That means there are no negative square roots. There's no i's in this equation. It has two real numbers. So we could figure it out. We could solve it using the quadratic formula just to see. So if we use the quadratic formula for this, it would be x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 1. That would give us negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 29 over 2, all over 2. which would give us negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 29 all over 2, which simplified would be negative 5 halves plus or minus the square root of 29 over 2. So because it has a plus and a minus, then this equation right here has two answers. It has the answer of negative 5 halves plus the square root of 29 over 2, and the other answer is negative 5 halves minus the square root of 29 over 2. So it has two answers. But your discriminant problems, they're not asking you to solve them. They don't want to know this solution, which is the tricky part. They only want to know whether or not it has two real numbers, or like we'll see in the next example, it will be two complex numbers, or does it have just one real number like our first one? So the first one that we had, where b squared minus 4ac equals 0. If it equals 0, then the solution is one real number. If our discriminant equals a positive number, then the solution has two real numbers. If, our third case, if our discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, is a negative number, then our solution has two complex solutions that happen to be conjugates. That sounds like a lot, but I will show you what I'm talking about. So in this case, this would be x squared plus 5x plus 7 equals 0. Let's just look at our discriminant. B squared minus 4ac. B squared would be 25 minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 7. So that would be 25 minus 28, which is a negative number. It's a negative 3. Again, negative 3 is not what x equals. That's not what we're looking at here. We're just seeing if this number is a negative number. Because it's a negative number, and that's what our discriminant tells us, then the solution to this equation is two complex numbers that are conjugates. And a complex number, if you remember, a complex number has a real part and an imaginary part. So the solution to this one, when you figure it all out, is negative 5 halves plus or minus the square root of 3 over 2 times I. You remember those ones? So the two solutions, because it's plus or minus, one is negative 5 halves plus the square root of 3 over 2 times I, and the other one is negative 5 halves minus the square root of 3 over 2 times I. Those are our two solutions. But again, our problems aren't looking for these answers. Our problems is just to determine whether it has one real number. So when b squared minus 4ac equals 0, then the solution is one real number. When b squared minus 4ac is a negative number, then it's two complex numbers. And when it's positive, then you have two real numbers. So, sounds complicated, but it really isn't. Let's see, for example, example number 93.1 asks you, what kind of solution does the equation x squared equals negative 4x plus 2 have? And it says, this was the part that made everyone happy, do not solve. It means do not solve for x. They don't want you to solve for x. They just want you to figure out the discriminant. So before we can figure out the discriminant, we have to rewrite this equation in the form with everything on the left side of the equation and everything set to 0. So we need to add 5x to each side and subtract 2 from each side. So we first have to rewrite this as x squared plus 4x minus 2 equals 0. Now we use our discriminant, which was b squared minus 4ac. So we find b squared. which is 4, squared, which is 16. Then we're going to subtract 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 2. So when you subtract that, you have 16 minus a negative 8, which gives us 24. 24 is a positive number. Because it's a positive number, then if you remember that when BAC equals positive, then the solution has two real numbers. So that's all they want you to write in your note. The answer to that problem would be two real numbers. That would be your answer. That's all you need to figure out. So let's do one more. It says, what kind of a solution or what kind of roots does the equation negative 2x equals negative 3x squared minus 8 have? And it'll say, do not solve. They don't want you to solve for x. They just want you to use the discriminative to see what type of solution it will have. B squared minus 4ac. That's our discriminant. So first we have to rewrite this equation in our standard form. We rewrite this so that it looks like this. 3x squared minus 2x plus 8 equals 0. Now we can find the discriminant. B squared, which would be negative 2 squared minus 4 times a, which in this case is 3, times c, which in this case is 8. That equals 4 minus 96, which equals a negative 92. Because it's negative, of negative value, then the solution is two complex numbers that are conjugates. That's your answer. You don't have to solve for them. So two complex numbers that are conjugates. Okay? So basically, if b squared minus 4ac equals 0, then the solution would be one real number. Okay? That's the discriminant. If the discriminant, when you figure it out, equals a positive number, then the solution is two real numbers. Okay? And if your discriminant is equal to a negative number, then your solution is two complex numbers that happen to be conjugates. Okay, that's basically all you need to know for that. And to know that this is the discriminant right there. And you always have to rewrite the equation in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You have to rewrite the equation so that everything is on the left side and 0 is on the right. So I think you'll be able to do lesson 93 now. Good luck.